Welcome back to our studio here in Barbados and in Geneva for the second of today's panel discussions. Ensuring access to water and sanitation for all is the sixth of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Increasingly, the world is seeing cross-border disputes over control of river flows and water resources to meet the needs of agriculture, industry, and expanding human settlements. Maggie, can you please give us an introduction?
At the end of this panel discussion. Also, the questions will be taken from the audience. But again, if you're following online, you can submit your question using Slido link on the conference platform. You will see the Slido icon in the auditorium next to the main screen. As a reminder, we'll be moving back and forth between Geneva and Barbados to get different reactions and views from everyone who is part of this particular event. Back to you, Winston, and let's just dive into the conversation.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Our first presentation is from Mr. McKinnon, Assistant Professor, University of Alabama. Professor McKinnon's research focuses on understanding the interactions between human and natural systems in determining the sustainability of freshwater resources. His specialties include water footprint assessment, water scarcity assessment, water management, crop water use modeling, spatial modeling, and water for energy. Professor McKinnon has published more than 50 highly cited peer-reviewed articles. He's a member of the editorial board of Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems Journal, and I now invite Mr. McKinnon to speak.
Thank you for the introduction. Moving to my talk would be focusing on how we could improve water use efficiency at 3 levels to make every drop of water has a value. Generally, when we talk about water use efficiency, the first thing that comes to mind is the irrigation efficiency, but it's not the only one. It's useful, but it's not the only one. There are 3 levels where we can make water use efficiency more efficient use of water. The first level is the user or the local level, where irrigation efficiency, soil water moisture measurement, use of remote sensing, or detailed irrigation management can be in terms of technology, or implementing water price to influence the user or the consumer behavior, and making the user more aware of the use of and the environmental impact of the water use. The second level is the river-based level, where it's more allocating water to where its value is high, its value added is there. At the global level, we talk about water use efficiency, the virtual water trade from water abundant to water scarce regions. When we move to the user level, we have 3 entry points. The first is, the next slide, please. As the water use efficiency. In water use efficiency, irrigation was efficiency, although the potential for saving water is high by improving irrigation from surface to drip irrigation, but it's not as much as one may think. Because the problem is when farmers improve water, they save water. In most cases, what happens is they use the saved water to irrigate more. And the other is the classical definition of irrigation efficiency, neglect or forget about the value of the return flow. When water returns and being used, reused throughout the watershed, it's the individual or the farmer's efficiency could be low, but at a basic level, it could be much larger. So using irrigation efficiency as a way to save water is problematic because it drives intensification, more use of water, and less water flowing out of the river basin. So the problem of irrigation was the irrigation efficiency led to the idea of water productivity, where water productivity is defined as the amount of product we produce per unit of water. So it connects both the product we want to maximize and the water input we want to minimize. When we talk about water productivity, it's a better measure of water, sustainable use of water, because it connects different water management practices like monitoring soil moisture, conservation agriculture, till, no-till agriculture, putting mulching to save the moisture in the soil, planting high water, drought-resistant crops, planting water climate smart crops, and different field level measures to improve the little water we have and produce more. The third entry level is raising the consumers' awareness, where consumers are made aware of more and more. Actually, consumers are becoming more aware that their consumption level, they think beyond their plate and wardrobe. So looking what happens when I consume a certain product in a far away. When we are consuming our hamburger or coffee, we may be draining the last drop of water in a faraway place where a small farmer, small community were depending. And another case is where the RLC dries up because of irrigation to produce cotton for export. So given the recent emergence of more sustainable aware consumers, socially aware consumers, and the interest of traders, retailers provide more sustainable products, create an opportunity where we can bring both together, create more sustainable consumption decision. So the rise in fair trade, organic products consumption level is because of the drive for sustainable thinking consumers. When we need to understand that everything we consume has a water, requires water. The figure shows that a unit of vegetable requires a much less water per unit per kilogram compared to a beef. Even within the meat products, chicken meat has a much larger, smaller water footprint compared to beef water footprint. So our decision to consume one or another, we have to look what it implies in terms of its impact in the water sustainability. Whether to be vegetarian or non-vegetarian, those decisions need to account for the sustainability of the water use. I want to make some point here that the numbers only doesn't tell much. Beef has a large water footprint, doesn't mean every beef produced will have a larger impact compared to the pig meat. A grazing, sustainably raised grazing system could be much sustainable compared to an intensive production of chicken or pig. So we have to look beyond the actual numbers. What's going on beyond? What's color of the water? Is it the rainwater? Is it the surface water? Which leads to more pollution, more water scarcity. So look behind the numbers and interpret. Another important point I want to highlight is there is a large amount of food waste and loss along the food supply chain. According to the FAO's estimate, 1/3 of the global food produced is lost or wasted before it's consumed. So what we see as a food waste from the iceberg, the food West iceberg shows that what is visible for the consumer is the small part of the iceberg, while the large part is hidden from us. The increasing water scarcity, driving greenhouse, increasing the greenhouse emission, deforestation, eroding land, or loss of wetlands, loss of biodiversity are hidden from us. So we need to raise the consumers' awareness to make sure that the decision we consume, what to consume, the decision to throw the food has implication. Food waste has both environmental consequence, it's also unethical. When you consider people are going hungry and you throw high nutritious food to the garbage, that's highly unethical. When we move to the basal level, we are talking about water allocation, efficient water allocation, where water use efficiency can be increased by reallocating water to those used with the highest marginal benefits. Besides increasing the allocation efficiency, water allocation could have other objectives like equity between different users, equity between different countries within the same basin, or within the same country, different regions. And it could have also environmental protection objectives, where instead of using the whole water for our production system, we have to let a certain amount of water to protect the ecosystem, the fresh water dependent ecosystems. The other objectives are development priorities. A country or a region may have a certain priority focusing on a certain group or a certain production system. So that could be one objective for water allocation. The other is balancing the supply and demand, especially the seasonal variation of water supply and demand. And the final level of water use efficiency is the global, where when countries trade products, they are importing or exporting water in virtual form. In doing so, if water abundant countries like Brazil, the US, the upper figure shows that those green countries are net virtual water exporters, while the green, yellow to green and red countries are like Europe, Middle East, Mexico, are net virtual water importers. So at a global level, water use efficiency can be increased if countries use their relative water abundance or scarcity either to encourage or discourage the export and import of products. Normally, those countries which we see as red may not be highly water scarce, because trade in agriculture product is mostly driven by other factors than the water. So import of virtual water is not often related to the country's water scarcity. The other issue which I want to highlight is there could be also danger for the importing countries, where, like we observed recently because of the COVID pandemic and other droughts, where the global trade flows were interrupted or disrupted. During droughts, some countries limited the export of basic food items to other countries, which creates the importing countries' supply risk. So at a global level, we need to have a global agreement that export or trade of food items should not be used as a weapon when problem arise. Standardized pricing, standardized sustainability use of water. Some countries may have a strict regulation to make water sustainable. That means producers may put, their price could be higher compared to the non-sustainably produced product in other parts of the country, which creates imbalance in the trade. So that should come from an international agreement to create a standardized benchmark of product sustainability, open trade among countries, and finally, what the whole story I want to say is we need to look, think globally, but act locally. Water is traded in virtual form globally. Products are traded globally, which needs global agreement, global standardization, global benchmarking. But the final solution or the actual work is at a field level where we improve irrigation, conservation agriculture is promoted. Farmers are trained to be more productive. So there is also a need where less developed or low-income countries are exposed, may not have the capacity or the capital to invest. So there should be a support from the highly developed countries to train and support them economically and technologically to improve their productivity. Thank you. That's sure.
Thank you very much, Professor Makinen. I think you sort of put the pressure back on the consumers. You know, a lot of times we sort of focus on the supply side, but your presentation has encouraged consumers to develop more sustainable consumption patterns as a way of addressing what you see as this issue of water scarcity across the globe. And not only thinking about water scarcity, but also how thirsty our food is, and the whole issue of food wastage as well. So thank you very much, Prof. The next presentation is by Dr. Adrian Cashman, Principal at Aquatics, Water Resources Management, and former lecturer at the University of the West Indies. Dr. Adrian Cashman has over 40 years of experience in the water sector, including work in the United Kingdom, Sub-Saharan Africa, and consulting projects across the Caribbean. I now invite my friend, Dr. Adrian Cashman, to speak.
Thank you very much for that, Winston, for that warm welcome. And before I get into what I'd like to say, is I just want to remind us all something which I know we know it, but it stands to be repeated. That is, water underpins development. We can't have any sort of development if we don't have water, and therein it plays a really critical role. And I think we've heard that already from some of the presenters, not only in this session, but in the former session, the previous session as well. This session is looking at sustainable solutions, but it also is, solutions are to a challenge. And with each challenge, and I think we've also heard this in earlier sessions, with each challenge there are opportunities. But although we've heard some great opportunities, some great innovations, particularly in the last section, I think we have to be realistic about what the challenges that they are that face us. So as you will see in the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what these challenges are, and I'm going to break it down into two parts. We'll look at two parts of this. I think first of all, there is a challenge with the water resource itself. And then the second part, complementary to it, is the challenges facing the ability to make those resources available. And my remarks are going to be sort of centered around the challenges in the Caribbean. And I make no apology for that. I'm based in the Caribbean, as you've heard, and it is a region that is really, really close to my heart. So I'm going to look, first of all, as you'll see in the next slide, at some of the challenges facing the water resources itself. And something that hasn't been talked about very much at the previously in the sessions is the impact of climate variability. I'm focusing on climate variability rather than climate change, because I think climate variability is in some ways a greater challenge, because it increases our uncertainty about what we have available. And what we're seeing is changes in extreme weather conditions. By that I mean we are seeing not only more frequent droughts, drier periods of time, and in some cases more severe droughts, but we're also seeing heavier rainfall conditions. And we've seen this, for example, with the hurricane activity, where the nature of the hurricane activity and what it brings with it also seems to have changed as well. We've seen more severe, more powerful hurricanes, and with that brings more powerful rainfall and its ability to damage. And then we also have, and I just mentioned this about water scarcity. And water scarcity happens both in time and place. And now you might see down there a little on the bottom right-hand side there, a picture of Jamaica and its rainfall. And I'm using that to illustrate. The red shows where in Jamaica the rainfall is the lowest. But for those of you who know a little bit about Jamaica, you will also recognize that that is where the Kingston metropolitan area is. And that is where the bulk of population is, where most water is needed. And actually, that's where it's scarcest, in Jamaica. Not only scarce, so you can see that there is scarcity in time and in space. And the other thing that we're seeing more and more, we're getting to understand it more and more, is the impact of pollution on our water resources. Because effectively, what we are doing is we are chemically inducing drought. There are measures that we have. I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the solutions that we have. But what we are doing in the Caribbean is we are looking at diversifying our sources of supply, and we are starting to consider things like conjunctive use. So that would be the use of surface water resources along with groundwater resources, so where one can help and supplement the other, because groundwater, in a way, you can think of as being water that has been banked for the future, and we make use of it. And then, of course, as has been talked about, we have the backstop technology of desalination. So an argument that is put is that we are a region full of islands. We're like a string of pearls, and we're surrounded by water, and we could make use of that. And although it is expensive, advances in solar-powered desalination is offering solutions, particularly, I would say, for some of our smaller islands where we have smaller populations, and this really could be a cost-effective solution to some of the challenges affecting the resource itself. Now I want to move on to the challenges around making water available. And I have to say that I think that this is where our biggest set of challenges lies. We are not in the round a region that is scarce in water resources. That doesn't apply to every country. I know Barbados is an example of that. Antigua and Barbuda is another example of country that is water challenged. But the resources are there, but how do we make them available? How do we make these accessible? And the barriers that we're facing here are things like uncertain finances. Providing water infrastructure is expensive. It's expensive to provide, it's expensive to maintain. And we have, as in the current economic situation, that is imposing greater challenges on our service provider. Let me tell you a little bit about the impact of COVID, for example, on water services. And we've seen some research that we have done has looked at this. What we've seen is, okay, there has been a drop in water consumption. The biggest drops are in the commercial and the hotel sector. Those are the sectors that actually provide the bulk of the income for our utilities. So whilst consumption in the domestic area has gone up, what is left is that the water utilities are being challenged to be able to raise the revenue, to service the repayments and that. And that leads me to the second point, the aging infrastructure. We're very much like some more developed countries where our infrastructure, we've made great strides over the decades in providing reliable water services to the people of the Caribbean. But that infrastructure is aging, and because of uncertain finances, we're finding it difficult to replace it and to keep those services at the high level that we've come to expect. One of the biggest problems, I would say, is inadequate planning. And I really point a finger at virtually every single Caribbean state here. The level of integration between the planning in the water sector and its intersection with national development planning is something that I personally believe really needs to be addressed. I could talk for a long time about that. I'm not going to. The lack of data, this is something that we've been talking about for at least the last 15 years, the data that we need for our planning there. We've heard some great innovations, the use of technology, but the use of technology is not going to solve the problem unless we put in the infrastructure to provide the data for that technology to work. Poor service coverage, that's not only in the domestic sector, we've got growing urban populations, growing rural populations as well that are underserved. And how do we extend reliable services? The other question, and I bring it up because it is a fact, is that politics is really close to the provision of water utilities. And if you talk to people in the water sector, one of the things that they find difficult in their planning is the changing needs that they are presented with. Now, that is fine, because that is the role of politics and politicians, but it does make the planning of the provision of water services much more difficult. And then the other one is human resources capacity. One of the things that really troubles me is the loss of young people from the Caribbean. Yes, we've heard examples of young people developing apps, but we are losing a lot of our intellectual capacity from the region. And there are a number of reasons for that. We are not giving them the opportunities to embark on careers in the water sector. We're not creating them. There are definite barriers to them being. So these are, I think, are all challenges of governance that we need to address. And so looking at the next slide, I'm going to bring it down a little bit to agriculture. Now, some of the interface between water and agriculture. Generally speaking, agriculture is a minor economic activity in most countries. It's really small scale. For example, in Barbados, 90% of farmers farm on less than half a hectare. And many of those are in the older age group. And if we're going to really serious about pushing agriculture as a major economic force, some of those challenges are going to have to be looked at. The other thing is that they're mostly rain-fed. and that means they're increasingly vulnerable to climate change and climate variability. We've heard some great ideas about the technology that can be rolled out, and yes, that is going to help. But older farmers are going to find that somewhat of a challenge. We really need to start thinking about how we can bring youth in. And my final slide is looking at some of the solutions. I've given you a lot of bad news. I apologize for that. I'm sorry about it, but it is a reality. But there are some really, really good things happening. So, for example, there's a regional strategic action plan for the water sector. It's bringing together regional actors, national actors together to look at what we're doing, to look at opportunities to collaborate, opportunities to build on shared experience. And this is something that is been gradually developing since about 2017, 2018, and it's really gathering momentum now. A more recent one is the Latin America Water Observatory, which looks at collecting water data. It goes back to what I was saying about some of the challenges there. This is a response, and we are actively working with partners to see how this can be rolled out in the Caribbean as well. I hold up Jamaica's national water sector policy as a really good practice example of what can be done. Here is a country that has developed a strategy, and it looks to update that policy and strategy on a regular basis, and also try and look at monitoring and evaluation to feed that back into policy direction and policy development. The other one, which goes back to the water resources themselves, is the gradual establishment of water resources agencies. Obviously, not every country has got them, but we are seeing an increasing rollout of water resources agencies independent of the water utilities to manage our water sector and bring a degree of impartiality into how those water resources are utilized. The crisis in water utility funding is starting to push new thinking, new ways about how water utilities can be financed. And a really good example of that is Barbados, where the possibility of utilizing renewable energy to cut down energy costs and to use the money that has been saved from energy costs to reinvest in infrastructure. And the other one is the increased interest in the use of wastewater. This is something that there are a lot of challenges. It's a resource that is out there. I mean, in conversations that I've had with farmers, that if this is treated, they are more than willing to use it. So this is an available resource that we are not using to the full benefit. There are, of course, difficulties, but it is something we are beginning to look at, and we're looking at it from a regional point of view as well as national points of view as well. But the fundamental problems, I think, come down to good governance and planning. And I think these need to be addressed with a lot more urgency than they are. And I think with that, I'm going to just stop there. And obviously, I will be more than happy to take questions and comments. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cashman. I know you apologize for giving such a detailed presentation of the challenges, but I think that was really important given the challenges that many developing countries face, and you did a really great job of that. Your final slide where you looked at some of the opportunities in relation to partnership, this provides that sort of link to the last panel where the whole theme of partnership came up very strongly as well. So I know you weren't collaborating, but you sort of had a really collaborative approach based on the last panel that emerged with that thematic area. The whole idea of wastewater is something that is, I know, very controversial in Barbados, and you've spoken a lot about. But the notion of governance and planning, I think, is very important across all developing countries. So Dr. Cashman has posed a number of really interesting thematic areas and questions, and I encourage you to post your questions in the Slido so that we can get to those in the Q&A session. Our next presentation is from Mr. Andre Langwust. And Mr. Langwust has been working as a business lawyer in France and Germany for 25 years, specialized in clean tech, renewable energies, energy efficiency, and sustainable clean tech and startups. He's the president of Eurosolar France and the French division of Eurosolar, the non-profit European Association for Renewable Energies. He's a founding partner and chief development officer of the Geneva-based consultancy firm Climate Capital. I now invite Mr. Langwust to make his presentation.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, dear Professor Moore. It's an honor to be with you. In the last 2 months, we learned even more how dependent we are on water. Worldwide, we face flooding in China, Africa, Europe. Scarcity of water is an issue on all continents. And at the same time, we use a lot of ice through melting in Greenland and Antarctica. And you see, right now, I'm in France, not very far away from UNCTAD main office, Geneva. The Mont Blanc glacier is vanishing. So if you want to visit it, you need to speed up a little bit. At the same time, we make too little progress on the SDG 6 indicators. In the most recent UN water report, it indicates that we need at least to double our speed to match the Earth's needs. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if all of you are really aware, 2.3 billion people live in countries with water stress. And today we have 1.2 billion people, including 450 million children that live in zones with high or extremely high water vulnerability. If we have now a look on the following graphs by World Health Organization and UNICEF, we can see one thing, and that is it's an important concentration of people lacking water, basically water for basic hygiene services and safely managed sanitation, especially in the countries of the global south, in Africa, parts of Latin America, and southern parts of Asia. But what is important to understand is as well that on the top, it's not only that they're missing the resources, but there's as well a huge lack of data. We heard that as well from the speakers before. About the existing infrastructure that provides us with the data that we need to set up programs and to act on the ground. The facts on renewables and water that might surprise you is, well, we can do it. Right now, the renewable energy technologies, and here I talk about technologies, it's not all about solar PV only, that we have available now, they are cheaper than ever, beating today even in a lot of countries existing coal plants, even with the high CO2 price. Desalination technology is available and industry is willing to scale up. Money is available. It hasn't been for quite some time as cheap as it is nowadays. And there are lots of partners and entities that are willing to invest. So what is missing? Missing is a political will, and that we really bring together well, almost all countries of the world in a structure, for example, like UNCTAD, to come together and say, okay, what can we do? In a recent study from a wonderful professor from the Finnish LUT University, Professor Breyer, he stated we need 40 times more the amount of water desalination compared to 2015. Just to give you a number, so far in the numbers of 2015, there had been almost 20,000 water desalination plants. We need 1 million. This will demand 4% of the total primary energy demand in 2050. This can be met fully with renewables. But of course, we need to invest and we need to make sure as well, where can we put this? This is needed with a strong focus, of course, on Eurasia, to the Middle East and North Africa, and the southern parts of Asia with India. Northeast India as well and North America will demand 91% of the global energy used for desalination. When we now have a look on the current systems of water desalination, we can distinguish, if I may concentrate on this case on solar, we distinguish the indirect and the direct solar desalination procedures. We have a short visual here on this graphic. If you want to go a little bit more into depth, you can find on the slide. The slide's going to be available afterwards as well, a link to get more information. So in this indirect part, we can, of course, replace solar energy by any other renewable energies that are locally available. Currently, mainly used for the large and the small scale installations are the membrane systems. That is the second graphic that you see here on this image. It gives you a slight idea how it works. But don't you worry, I will not go too much into technical details. Don't forget, I'm only a lawyer. The smart people are the engineers that put together the terrific jobs on the ground. Now, please let me just give you a small insight on two small scale examples from Africa. The first one is from Pembane in Mozambique. And what you can see on this first image is that the village is just lying next to the ocean. And still, they used to lack water. What was the solution? Some friends of mine came together and said, well, we can do something. We've got the technology. Solar is feasible there. So they installed a pump with a water purification system and pumped the water into a 10-meter high tower to make the distribution system work. So that is one, the tower. This is the second image, that's the tower. The people in Pembane get their water via a small RFID chip. So whenever they go there, they have to pay. Some of you might say, okay, well, these people, they do not have a lot of money. But I think it's as well important that we understand we need to do a business case there. That as well people on the ground can make some money, that they understand this is a service, and that is something as well that's going to help them to make progress. And of course, one people in this case on the ground is the guy who's doing the maintenance, because somehow we need as well to make sure that this job is done, and of course it's done by the local specialist that has been trained by the company that set up the design. By the way, maybe you remember before when we had to look on the water delivery, there was a lady with a bucket on the head, and that was a lady from this village. Before they installed the Mati project. Mati means in local language water. Now let's have a look on the next project as well from Africa. That is called Water Kiosk. They so far have, and I had this morning a talk with the CEO of this Berlin-based startup. He told me they do not only have something like 20 or 30 projects that they've done so far for hospitals realized in Eastern Africa, but 115 projects in East Africa. And I was quite amazed how much water they can purify per hour. The range of their production line is between 2,000 up to 10,000 liters an hour, and that is enormous. And that is something that can help hospitals, but as well local communities. And what I understood as well from our presentators from Barbados, I think in lots of villages in Barbados that could be as well quite helpful. Because the most important thing here is that they're autonomous from energy. So they do not need to be connected to the grid, and that is something that is well quite helpful. So these projects that this Boreal Light company installed in hospitals in Kenya and in Tanzania that helped a lot, 28 hospitals in Kenya and Tanzania to tackle the water problems that they face due to COVID crisis. So this is what can be done for local small-scale communities, especially those who are not connected to any electric grid at all. In some areas, even the cities or the villages that are connected to the grid, well, due to poor local electricity production, sometimes they could be considered as well as off-grid, so it is well helpful for them to have a reliable, clean water production. But energy autonomy for desalination plants is one key, of course, but what we need as well, and we just had a mention of Barbados, no, about Jamaica, sorry, that particularly in the area where the larger cities are found, we do not have enough water. So what we need is as well the large-scale water desalination projects. What you can see here on this slide, there are two facilities. The first one is from Sorek in Israel, that is run on traditional energy. That could nowadays, of course, easily replaced by renewables. It provides almost 20% of the drinking water that is needed in Israel. It's enormous. And it's very close to the ocean. And what we see right now in lots of Caribbean areas, well, there's water scarcity, but of course we've got the water from the ocean. So possibilities are there. There are possibilities as well from renewable energy sources, but we need to have a closer look. What is possible there? Solar could be a solution, wind could be a solution, but let's have a closer look to one project that has been realized. This is the second project that has been realized in Al-Kafiji. I hope I pronounce it correctly. That is in northeast and Saudi Arabia. That is a water desalination water desalination plant with a capacity of 60,000 cubic meters a day of desalinated seawater, providing a regular supply of water to the region throughout the year. Now, there are some basic questions, elements that we need for a successful desalination project. What you need on the ground is a good team. And a good team means, A, you need to have the specialists. But specialist is one thing. But if you do not have a kind of chief of the orchestra, kind of generals who can bring together the good specialists, very often you have projects that are not very, very good. So don't forget to get the general orientation on board and to have this in mind, what you really want to need, what you really need. Then, very important is the more holistic you think your project, the better. While integrating other needs of the local community, the benefit for all will be higher, as well as the acceptance. The more you integrate the people, the better it is. For example, a larger PV system that could help neighbors to get good energy. A larger battery system or a larger water storage facility could help neighboring structures, neighboring villages, or maybe even industry that you have. Then, very important, there is no one solution fits all. Don't forget, it's good to understand the general setting of a project, maybe from a neighboring island, from a neighboring country, but you have to transpose it so that it fits to your local needs. Extremely important when we talk about energy, and we all need energy to purify water. Solar PV is right now by far the easiest and the cheapest energy source for all local energy production. Large variety we have on storage facilities that are available. We have got battery storage, we've got thermal storage, heat, for example, hot water, but as well cold. Don't forget cooling containers could be sometimes quite interesting, particularly for rural areas in Africa, where lots of farmers do not have the possibility to store their harvest. Now, I suggest I continue and give back the word to the moderator. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact me via mail or via my LinkedIn site, and I'm happy to be there for any questions. Thank you very much.
Well, he claims that he's only a lawyer, but that was an excellent presentation for just a lawyer. One of the key themes that came out in that presentation was the important link between water and energy. And in developing countries, that is a very important link because for most water production companies, energy is one of the major underlying costs for those companies. And the whole link between renewable energy and clean water, it was also came up very strongly in the presentations. So thank you very much for that presentation. Our final presentation is from Mr. Alan Williams, General Manager, R&D Investment, Cotton Research and Development Corporation, who's joining us from Australia. Two intersecting themes have dominated his work in cotton: research and sustainability. Mr. Williams has been involved in the cotton industry for pretty much his entire life, having grown up on a cotton farm and worked in various industries, industrial roles, since 1995. Following 11 years working on the Australian Cotton Industries BMP program, Alan then started working for the Global Better Cotton Initiative, again leading the development of the definition of better cotton. This saw him expand his cotton farming perspective to locations including Brazil, West Africa, India, and Pakistan. I now invite Mr. Williams to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Winston. Very pleased to be here. It's 1:30 in the morning. I might pay attention to time zone differences a bit next time, though. If you have the first slide, please. To help provide some context, I'd like to start by giving a very quick overview of cotton in Australia and the organisation I work for, the Cotton Research and Development Corporation. And this map shows the current major cotton growing areas in Australia, which are all on the eastern side of the country, centred on the major river systems that flow southwest. As approximately 80 to 90% of our production is irrigated, I'll be taking an irrigation focused perspective today. Despite our reliance on irrigation, our production levels are volatile. Our river systems are amongst the most variable in the world. And so, for example, in 2020, Australia produced about 135,000 tonnes of cotton lint. But for the season we're about to commence, we are forecasting over 1 million tonnes of cotton lint, or a 7-fold change in just 2 years. So unsurprisingly for us, water is an extremely precious resource for our farmers, and they continue to improve their water use efficiency. The amount of water used to grow a bale of cotton, 227 kilograms or 500 pounds of lint, is now half what it was in the 1990s. Or in another way, our water productivity has doubled since the 1990s, and it continues to improve at about 2.5% per annum. The average cotton grower today achieves beyond what the top 1% of cotton farmers achieved 20 years ago. Much of this improvement has been driven by research funded by the Cotton Research and Development Corporation, which is based in Narrabri. It's a partnership between Australian cotton growers and the federal government, who each contribute $2.25 for a bale of cotton for research, with the aim of benefiting both the cotton growers and the communities that they live in. And our job at CRDC is to identify the research needs and invest in research to address them. And research into improving water use efficiency has long been a core activity for CRDC, and I suspect will continue to be for quite some time yet. Next slide, please. Before I talk a little bit about what we're currently focusing on to further improve water use efficiency, I wanted to discuss the concept of virtual water from the perspective of farmers, given it was mentioned in the background information to this conference. And I'll be blunt, in my experience, the concept has very little usefulness for farmers. And I think there are at least 2 main reasons for this. First, the problem with the use of virtual water footprints is that they do not provide any information that a farmer can use to improve their water productivity or water footprint. One of the reasons for this, of course, is the difficulty in taking into account local context. Farming takes place in a hugely variable environment. Soil type, fertility, nutrient levels, water holding capacity, bulk density, and slope can and do vary across the same farm, between farms, and from region to region. Climatic conditions such as seasonal temperatures, ranges, season length, rainfall volumes, and intensity can vary from region to region and year to year, as do insect, weed, and disease pressures. Of course, in contrast, water footprints are very coarse and very large in their scale, simply cannot account for that variation. And I appreciate that virtual water in particular was not designed to provide utility to farmers, but the related concept of water footprint, as embodied by life cycle assessment, is too often claimed to be useful, which leads me to my second and more critical point. The next slide, please. I've seen, in my experience, virtual water or water footprints used by the supply chain to assess whether or not they should be buying cotton from a particular region based on a simple comparison between different regions and their water footprint. The approach, however, does not take into account how that water is being managed locally and diminishes the agency of the farmer. On the basis, of course, that there is an agreed system for allocating water, farmers are best placed to decide the best use of such a valuable resource. What crops they should irrigate and grow should be determined by what fits best within their cropping program, their seasonal conditions, current market prices for the range of crops they can grow, and of course their individual economic and geographic circumstances. Further, their use by the supply chain can lead to variable information and be potentially misleading, which is why this slide is up in front of you now. There are multiple methods for calculating a water footprint, and the choice of method can significantly affect the calculation of how much water is said to be used in producing a product. And this is a real-world example from the Australian dairy industry relating to a life cycle assessment based water scarcity footprint of how much water is required to produce a litre of milk. Data was collected from 75 dairy farms across Australia, and that data was used to calculate the water scarcity footprint using 3 different models. Each bottle represents the results from a different model, with the average of all 75 farms in the blue band on the bottle for each model. The range of each model's results for the 75 farms is represented by the numbers at the end of the vertical bars alongside each bottle. So as you can see, there is a greater than 300 times difference between the model with the lowest average and the one with the highest average, a low of 18 to a high of over 6,600, despite the same 75 farms being analysed by each model. From a consumer's perspective, it would send a fundamentally different message if you say a litre of milk requires 18 litres of water to produce, compared to it taking 6,600 litres. Yet both those figures are based on legitimate life cycle assessment methodologies for assessing the impact of water use. So turning to my last slide, and what we're doing in Australia to continue to improve our water use efficiency. Traditionally, the decision as to when to irrigate has been informed by monitoring soil moisture and then irrigating once a certain trigger point or soil moisture deficit is reached. Whilst this has served growers well, it's not perfect. First, you can only deploy a limited number of soil moisture probes in the field, so it relies on that site where the probe is being truly representative of the field as a whole. And that's especially given you're effectively measuring only a few square centimetres of soil, while the field in Australia could be 100 hectares or more in size. Further, soil moisture is effectively a proxy for how the crop is growing water-wise. So a major focus over the last few years for us has been to look at sensing the cotton plant directly, and you can see a sensor being used to do that in the photo, to determine when it needs to be irrigated based on the temperature of the canopy of the crop. And research supported by CRDC has identified a threshold based on continuously measuring the temperature of the leaves of the plant linked to soil moisture information. I appreciate, of course, that this type of technology may not be currently suitable for a lot of farmers, particularly in smallholder circumstances. But nevertheless, I think it provides an incredible opportunity to improve water use efficiency. And if Australia's example is any guide, there is plenty of room for improvement in water use efficiency. Sensors are only becoming cheaper and cheaper, so the cost doesn't necessarily have to be a major barrier. And in any event, the business model in Australia for this technology is that the provider owns, installs, and services these sensors, so that the farmer only effectively pays a license fee for them rather than having to buy them and look after them themselves. So with that, in the interest of time, I will wrap up. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Williams. I think it showed very clearly that technology has a very important role to play in how we manage water and also in terms of agriculture. Now, we've had a couple of questions coming in from our online audience, and I would like to now invite my panelists to respond to the questions. The first question that we have coming in from the online audience is, consumers may not be sufficiently informed of their impact on freshwater resources, especially the traded goods they consume. How could governments ensure the sustainable use of water for traded goods? And Mr. McKinnon, your presentation focused a lot on consumers. So can I ask you to respond to this question first?
Yeah, the more and more informations are made available, especially in the water footprint, water scarcity. So the first thing is making sure that those figures, numbers are accessible to everyone. But the interpretation is the problem. A large water footprint mostly doesn't mean it's negative for the environment. So government, NGOs, they have to interpret those figures in terms of where is the water problem, where the product comes from. Is it sustainably produced? And when that product is sustainably produced, how do we encourage sustainable production through the price system? So those water scarcity tariff or sustainably produced, like the organic farms, organic products, they are valued highly, so they have a premium. Such kind of pricing could be put in the price and system where government, NGOs, traders, retailers can work together to inform the consumers, make it more sustainable, and the value the consumer paid for should go to the final farmers. Even small farmers should get for their effort to improve the water sustainability. So it's an effort of both traders, consumers, and the government to make it more clear and more sustainable production and make it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKinnon. Thank you. I just have one more quick question. Mr. Langos, in your presentation, you would have spoken about the role of revenue, and sort of getting that as an aspect of the sustainability of the project. So this question is for you. Is the level of revenue a major criterion in the implementation of solutions to tackle water scarcity? Or do you think there are other criteria that should be considered as more pivotal? And I'll just give you maybe a minute or two to answer that question.
Well, I guess it is as well a critical question, but it's not the only one. I think it's very important that water can generate as well revenues on the ground. Because right now, whether the people, whether they have to go somewhere for quite some time to pick up some buckets of not very clean water, where they have to buy it. So it's money that quits the neighborhood. And if the people can get fresh, clean water for a small price in the villages, well, that can help them as well to use that time for something different. So it's one element, but of course it's not the only one. What we need to understand is, well, what we need to bring together is with a holistic approach to find solutions in small villages and small towns that we deliver kind of infrastructure where we have several parts that can generate as well income for the local communities, and the better we integrate as well annex like clean energy production or cooling as a service, water as a service, transport as a service, the better it is.
Okay. Thank you very much for that response. I'm now going to invite our panelists to offer some quick closing comments. I'm going to give you guys maybe a minute maximum to make your closing comments. Starting first with you, Mr. Mekinen.
Yeah, it's for me. It's from my talk. I talk about the different level of water efficiency. So everyone has a responsibility: consumers, retailers, the government, the producers, where water is valued, and work together to improve productivity, reward responsible production, and discourage inefficiency. That's
Well, thank you for that. Listening to the presentations that we've had, I just want to pick up on the matter of desalination. And yes, we've heard quite a lot of where desalination can play a role. And yes, in the Caribbean, it does play a big role in our water provision of water to consumers. But I wouldn't want us to lose sight of that there are other solutions, and we have to think holistically. I mean, for example, we lose anywhere between 40 and in some countries up to 70% of water from our aged infrastructure. That's water wasted that could have been used. That's money wasted that could have gone to it. So to me, desalination is part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. And I think there are often less glamorous solutions out there which we should be looking at. And our aged water infrastructure, reducing non-revenue water is I think, should be one of our top priorities.
Yes, I entirely agree with my colleague. Holistic approach is extremely important. We should reduce wasting water. These pictures from Aral Lake are just thrilling. But what we should think as well about is that the water system is quite similar to the electric system. We're moving from a centralized system to a decentralized system, and the closer we can produce clean water to the need of electricity, to the need of water, sorry, there's someone calling me, the better it is, and the more we can reduce as well the cost for water tubes, etc. That does not mean that we should not put some money into the infrastructure that exists. Of course, we need to keep a weary eye on that. But let's work together. Let's try to reduce there where we can the use of water, and think as well over the edge. There are lots of possibilities like agro PV, where we can do lots of things, combining it with water desalination. Let's think holistically, and let's think as well what is the best for the local people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I would just like to emphasize the importance of the complexity, or understanding the complexity of farming, and caution against systems that try to simplify this complexity to sell products to consumers. There's a lot of effort going on to put a single score on labels of consumer products. But a single score, if you're looking at a dozen different impact areas, of which water would be a critical one, alongside other things like greenhouse gas emissions, I think risks masking the complexity of farming and the need for trade-offs between the production of food and fibre and the impacts of that food and fibre on the environment. So I guess just caution that we need to have a system that helps support farmers to improve what they need to do, but also helps educate consumers about the complexity of farming, and making sure they don't just use a simple score to say this product's better than that product because of a very, I guess, crude measure of a very complex system. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to our audience for being part of this second session. I now hand you over to Maggie, who will let you know what's on the agenda for tomorrow. Maggie?
Thank you very much, Winston, and to the panelists for the amazing presentations. Of course, one thing stood out from today's panels, and that's technology and innovation. And from what we've heard, access to water or sustainable agriculture, we definitely have to find innovative ways to keep this going. And the need for partnerships, I can't emphasize that a lot. And to the audience, thanks for being with us. We have an interestingly packed day tomorrow with other two sessions focusing on energy transitions in the era of climate change. And our first session will look at the future of oil and gas dependent economies as many countries move to more sustainable, low carbon energy sources. And of course, this is a lot of developing countries that have been so dependent on oil and gas. That would be such an interesting conversation, especially for somebody like me who comes from the African continent. But also we have a second session focusing on mineral resources that will be needed to successfully implement these new renewable energy technologies. And that brings us to the end of our sessions today. Thanks again for being with us, and see you again tomorrow.
Out of crisis and catastrophe comes opportunity, yeah, for real change in the world economy, to reduce vulnerability and inequality. So we coming together virtually to expand opportunities for developing countries. At UNCTAD 15, resolving trade issues, youth issues and gender issues too. Civil society and creative industries are part of the call to bring prosperity for all. Small island, big ideas, much more than the beach. Small country, big reach, touching the world virtually. We might be small, but proud people standing tall. Creative and hardworking, we bring Barbados to you. If you can't come to Barbados,